side is India on anyway? At a global security conference in Bratislava last summer, a journalist posed this question to India's Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar.
There will always be two axes. At this point, I think it's an understood, accepted fact that you have the West, US-led, you have China as the next potential axis. Where does India fit into this? Are you planning to not pick a side?
No, I'm sorry. That is exactly where I disagree with you. This is the construct you are trying to impose on me, and I don't accept it.
After enduring a century of British colonial rule, it's understandable that Indians would bristle at being told to, quote, pick a side, especially when the side they're being told to pick includes their former colonizer. And Indians feel they shouldn't have to hide behind anyone. This behemoth of a nation just passed China to become the most populous country on earth, and its rapidly growing economy, number 5 today in the world, could overtake Germany and Japan's within this decade. But the exchange does raise a couple of questions about the India-US relationship. First, the interviewer's assumption that, quote, there will always be two global axes, one led by the US and the other by China. Do I buy that? I, just like Minister Jaishankar, do not. She's talking about a bipolar world that anyone over 45 like me grew up in, with the US and the Soviet Union calling the shots and pretty much every other country choosing a side. But unlike in the Cold War days of two dueling superpowers, the US and Chinese economies have long been intertwined, and that brings us to a much more multipolar environment, a new global order without superpowers, where developing nations like India or Brazil or South Africa have embraced a kind of geopolitical polyamory. And now I'm forcing you to embrace that mental image as well. And that brings me to my next question, which, as it so happens, is a riff on my first question. So maybe it was only one question. Is India on our side? Is India a US ally? I mean, judging by the plushest of red carpets President Biden rolled out for Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi during his visit to Washington earlier in June, the answer seemed obvious.
I've long believed that the relationship between the United States and India will be one of the defining relationships of the 21st century.
Biden is clearly adopting the you can catch more flies with chutney than just vinegar approach here. And yes, there is vinegar also in chutney, so I won't use that analogy again. The two nations have also significantly tightened their military ties in recent years. The Indian Armed Forces now conduct more exercises with the United States than with any other nation. And both countries regularly share sensitive intelligence. U.S.-Indian defense trade, which was negligible around the turn of the century, reached over $20 billion in 2020, and that's in large part due to mutual interest to curb China's military ambitions in the Asian region. There have been repeated and deadly clashes between Chinese and Indian troops along the two countries' 2,100-mile-long contested border. And then there's the explosion of the Indian diaspora in the West, and the United States in particular, with Indian Americans occupying some of the most powerful seats in America's public and private sectors. But there's a difference between being a strategic partner and being an ally. India has refused to explicitly condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Well, that's not like an ally, and has continued to import record-breaking amounts of cheap oil from Moscow, which the US doesn't really oppose because cutting off all Russian oil would roil the global economy. But still, Delhi is also the largest buyer of Russian weaponry in the world, at least for now, purchasing $13 billion worth of Russian arms in the last 5 years. India's also criticized the US decision to block Iranian and Venezuelan oil from the open market, and Delhi has repeatedly tried to strengthen diplomatic ties between Iran, Russia, and China. Not nice, India. Allies, strategic partners, frenemies, maybe they're all just labels that political scientists like me like to use. But labels aside, how tenable is it for India to maintain such an independent path in an increasingly hostile geopolitical landscape? Or is not picking sides the whole point? As the poet John Donne once kind of said, no man or subcontinent is an island.